Let's get into this session here. To start, in MainStage 3, we're using MainStage 3 for this session, and I start here in the concert level patch. I should note that I start with the reverb and delay plugins that I use throughout the session. I place them as aux sends on the concert level patch. This means that they'll show up on every other patch in the session. And I use specifically these two stock Logic plugins, the Silver Reverb and the Stereo Delay, which are pretty easy on CPU usage. You'll also notice over here I have this really handy CPU load history meter, which is showing us in real time the CPU usage of specific plugins. So you'll notice the Silver Burb here is indicated by the purple, and I think the gray would indicate the delay. Let's see here if we, well, here it indicates just other plugins, but this is a great graphical display of what's being used in real time. You'll also notice over here that I have the session broken up into two sets, set 1 and set 2. The first two patches are what I call main rigs, and these contain what I call my utility knife, and that would be just like the most useful and basic sounds that I would use in any given rock concert setting. So my habit also is to use the bottom keyboard for the electric pianos, Wurlitzers, Rhodes, clavinets, things of that nature. Sometimes I'll use a pad. And I usually like to use the top keyboard for solo instruments such as mini Moog leads or horn patches, strings, and of course Hammond organs I usually like to put on the top keyboard. MainStage does allow you to give a graphical display for the layers that you have assigned to each keyboard. I have that turned off currently in this workspace setting. I wanted to free up some space here in the interface to see some other things. Anyway, back to these main rigs. Both of them have essentially, there's a little variation between them. Here we have a Rhodes, a Hammond, a synth pad. This is an Oberheim 4-voice, which is like a polysynth, a brassy polysynth sound. Synth lead, a horn section, and strings. In this particular one, we also have a harmonica. The other main rig has essentially mostly the same things. I have a different synth plug-in for this one, but these are what I call, like I said, my meat and potato sounds. And I can go to either of these at any point during the session and just draw up a full palette of sounds that I can go to. Each of these sounds is already mapped to one of the two hardware keyboards in the rig. So that's what these two main rig patches are up here. Additionally, what I do is from these two main rigs, I'm going to create aliases of the plugins from these patches for use throughout patches within the session. What that does is it allows having aliases helps out with the CPU load. It means it's just simply one instance of that particular plugin that's used, instead of a copy paste where you'd have two instances of something like a contact, for example. You copy that instrument and paste it as an alias into another patch. So now I'm going to talk about the interface a little bit. One thing that makes MainStage so handy is the ability to customize the graphic interface that represents the controllers in your setup exactly to your taste. So just a brief look at this workspace panel here, and I'll describe what I have going on here. Up here we have a mixer. This represents the Nano Control MIDI controller that I use for controlling all of the sounds. So each of these buttons represents an actual physical control on the nano control. So what I did is I created a graphical interface that looks essentially exactly like the nano control. Over here we have a patch list. This shows which patch that I'm on at any given point. I can scroll through these remotely from the nano control by just simply hitting a button that I've already assigned on the device. Over here we have a transport window that it shows the waveform and position of samples being played back on certain patches. For example, on moving out, we have a preset. We'll play this later, but this represents the waveform that I'll trigger on that patch. And then over here we have a CPU and a level VU meters that just give an indication of what the CPU and output level is for the session. And then down here, of course, we have the keyboard controllers. These show the responsiveness of the hardware keyboards as they're being played, and it also shows the pitch and modulation wheels as they're being used, along with the sustain pedals and the expression pedals. So you would use these graphical interfaces to interact with doing the MIDI mapping and also for just monitoring the activity going on in the session. Again, a very useful utility within MainStage is this CPU load history meter, which again tells you, shows you the percentage of CPU usage according to which plugins are going on in the patch. This is great for isolating which plugins are putting more of a draw on your system. So as you can see here, Contact is the real culprit, and of course it makes sense because we have 3 instances of it going on. So if we were to turn any one of these off, you would actually see it should see it come down a little bit down here. So yeah, you see it spike a little bit.